The world's first general-purpose electronic computer contained 17,000 vacuum tubes that engineers knew would constantly fail. The 6 brilliant mathematicians who invented programming from absolute scratch, creating techniques we still use today, were labeled refrigerator ladies in official photos. History didn't just forget them. It deliberately erased their names for decades. And the machine they brought to life? Its very first real job wasn't calculating artillery trajectories. It was computing whether humanity could build a hydrogen bomb. February 1943. World War II is in full swing, and the US Army has a math problem that just won't quit. New weapons are basically useless without artillery tables, those trajectory calculations that tell gunners where to actually aim. Each single trajectory takes about 20 hours of human calculation. Can you imagine? The Ballistic Research Lab has hundreds of women working at human computers, but they can't keep up with the demand. The backlog means brand new weapons just sit there idle, waiting for the math that makes them accurate. And in wartime, every single delay costs lives. The pressure was absolutely crushing. Enter 2 academics with what sounds like an insane idea. Build a machine using thousands of fragile glass tubes, wire them together with literal miles of cable, pump enough electricity through the whole thing to power a neighborhood, and somehow convince this Frankenstein's monster to calculate faster than any human alive. Oh, and do all of this during a war when you can't even get basic electrical components, because every factory is busy making weapons. No pressure, right? Everyone thought Presper Eckert and John Mauchly were building a white elephant, basically an expensive joke that would never actually work. And honestly, they weren't wrong to be skeptical. Eckert was an electrical engineer with serious experience in vacuum tube circuits. Mauchly was a physicist who'd studied computational methods. Still, neither of them had built anything remotely close to what they were proposing. The existing computers were mechanical, all gears and levers. Slow, sure, but at least reliable. Eckert and Mauchly wanted to go fully electronic, which meant vacuum tubes. Thousands and thousands of them. Why was everyone so skeptical? Well, vacuum tubes were notoriously unreliable. They burned out constantly. The math was pretty brutal. If you've got 17,000 tubes and each VUT has even a tiny chance of failing every day, you're basically guaranteed something will break. It's like trying to keep 17,000 old light bulbs working simultaneously. Good luck with that. But the Army was desperate, so on June 5, 1943, they signed the contract for Project PX, the code name for what would become ENIAC. And immediately, everything went wrong. First problem, there were no off-the-shelf parts. Everything had to be custom-made during World War II, when every electronics company was already drowning in military orders. Wartime procurement was an absolute nightmare. Every component was precious, every supplier was maxed out making weapons. RCA became their primary vacuum tube supplier, but sourcing 17,000 tubes during the war? That alone was an engineering logistics miracle. The team had to beg, improvise, and wait months for basic components. Talk about building under pressure. Second problem, nobody actually knew if this would work. The scale was completely unprecedented. They were building 40 panels each, 8 feet tall, 2 feet wide, foot deep, arranged in a U-shape that would fill an entire room. Each panel was crammed with tubes, resistors, capacitors, relays, switches. The whole thing would weigh 30 tons, about the same as 6 full-grown elephants standing in your living room. Miles upon miles of hand-soldered wiring connecting 500,000 soldered joints, every single wet done by hand. Can you even imagine the tedious precision required? One bad connection and the whole thing could fail. The pressure on those engineers must have been unreal. Third problem, the heat. 17,000 vacuum tubes don't just compute, they cook. ENIAC would consume 150 kilowatts of power, generating massive amounts of heat as those tubes operated. They needed huge ventilation systems, and sometimes, they literally had to open the windows and doors to keep the room from becoming an oven. The world's most advanced computing machine, cooled by the same technology humans have used since living in caves. Fresh air. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Here's this cutting-edge electronic marvel, and they're managing the temperature like it's a stuffy kitchen. The irony is just perfect. If you're enjoying these ridiculous engineering contradictions, hit that like button. There's plenty more where that came from. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The engineers were so focused on building the hardware that they completely overlooked something crucial. How do you actually tell this thing what to do? Like, the machine exists, but how do you communicate with it? Nobody had thought that far ahead. Enter 6 women mathematicians. Their names were Kathleen McNulty, Jennings, Frances Snyder, Marlyn Wescoff, Frances Bilas, and Ruth Lichterman. They were hired as operators, basically human assistants. But there was a pretty major problem. There were no programming manuals, no programming languages, no examples. Nobody had ever programmed an electronic computer because electronic computers didn't exist yet. So these 6 women did something extraordinary. They taught themselves how ENIAC circuits worked by studying electrical diagrams. They invented programming techniques from absolute scratch. Subroutines? They created them. Nested loops? Decade before anyone else. Parallel processing? They figured it out in 1945. These women essentially invented software engineering, while everyone else was obsessing over the hardware. But programming ENIAC wasn't like typing code on a computer today. It meant physically rewiring the entire machine. Thousands of switches had to be set by hand. Patch cords had to be plugged and unplugged like an old telephone switchboard. For each new problem, this process could take days. You couldn't just hit run and grab a coffee. You had to rebuild the machine's entire logical architecture by hand, every single time. Imagine debugging that. One wrong switch setting out of thousands, and you'd have to check everything all over again. The patience required is honestly mind-blowing. May 1945, Germany surrender. Late November, early December 1945, ENIAC finally passes its first successful tests. The war it was built to help win? Already over. The artillery tables that justified its massive budget? Too late. The irony is almost painful, right? All that work, all that pressure, and they just barely missed the deadline. But here's what nobody knew at the time. ENIAC's first real production run in December 1945 wasn't artillery tables at all. It was top-secret calculations for the hydrogen bomb project, computing whether a thermonuclear weapon was even possible. The machine built to calculate trajectories for conventional weapons first helped birth the thermonuclear age. ENIAC would eventually compute countless artillery tables, but its baptism by fire was literally nuclear fire. Talk about a plot twist. The breakthrough that made ENIAC actually functional came from an unexpected discovery. Remember those vacuum tubes that threatened to fail constantly? Engineers realized most failures happen during warm-up and cool-down thermal stress from temperature changes. The solution was totally counterintuitive. Never turn it off. Keep ENIAC run continuously at stable temperatures, and don't overstress the tubes. Run them below their rated capacity. Suddenly, ENIAC transformed from temperamental prototype to workhorse. The machine achieved 50 to 80% uptime during its productive years, often running for days without failure. They conquered a massive technical challenge everyone said was impossible. Drop a comment if you think you could handle babysitting 17,000 vacuum tubes without losing your mind. The public unveiling on February 14, 1946, was pure theater. Neon lights flashed as numbers rushed by in the accumulators. The room hummed with thousands of tubes and cooling fans. ENIAC performed 5,000 additions per second, a speed that made human calculators instantly obsolete. The press called it an electronic brain. Skeptics who'd called it a white elephant went completely silent. That first ENIAC was hilariously primitive by modern standards. It had 20 accumulators for memory, each storing one 10-digit number. Your smartphone has billions of times more memory. ENIAC could do 5,000 additions per second. Your phone does billions. ENIAC weighed 30 tons and filled a room. Your phone weighs 200 grams and fits in your pocket. ENIAC consumed 150 kilowatts. Your phone uses about 5 watts. ENIAC used 30,000 times more power for infinitely less capability. But here's what's truly remarkable. ENIAC proved it could be done. From February 1946 until mid-1948, ENIAC stood completely alone, the only operational electronic general-purpose computer on planet Earth. The Manchester baby wouldn't run its first program until June 1948. EDSAC wouldn't come online until May 1949. For those first years, if you wanted electronic computing, ENIAC was literally the only game in town. Every computer that came after, from the mainframes of the 60s to the personal computers of the 80s to the smartphones of today, traces its ancestry back to that room in Philadelphia. The evolution was logical. Make tubes smaller, then replace them with transistors, then integrate transistors onto chips, then shrink the chips. Each generation faster, smaller, cheaper, more reliable. It's honestly beautiful when you think about it. From a 30-ton, room-filling monster to something that fits in your palm. So here's a question for you. Those 6 women who invented programming techniques that we still use today, techniques so fundamental that modern software engineering would be impossible without them, their names appeared in some original ENIAC materials, but not a programmers, operators, refrigerator ladies, in NEN photo caption. Seriously. The official histories minimized their technical contributions for decades until researcher Kathleen McNulty started asking in the 1980s, wait, who are these women? What she uncovered was deliberate historical amnesia. The 6 women who programmed the world's first general-purpose electronic digital computer were treated as footnotes in their own revolution. Makes you wonder what other crucial contributions have been written out of the history books, doesn't it? So here's your challenge. Drop a comment, say, I consume enough power to light a small neighborhood, and tell me which historical figure you think got written out of the story they actually created. Because if 6 women can invent programming and get reduced to refrigerator ladies, who else got erased? And while you're thinking about that, subscribe, because every invention has a messier, weirder, more fascinating origin story than the official version. The vacuum tubes were just the beginning. There are brilliant people behind every impossible machine who built absurd contraptions that somehow changed everything, and their real stories are way better than the myths.